Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the sandstone silence of ancient Thebes, where the perfume of crushed roses lingers in the air and secrets drift between stone columns like desert wind. You're not here as a historian. You're not even here as a tourist. You're something softer, like a whisper carried in the folds of a linen curtain. Somewhere in the hush of twilight, a young Egyptian queen bends over a piece of papyrus, her brow furrowed not with war or taxes, but with the impossible ache of love. Her fingers are stained with ink the color of dried hibiscus. And her poems, she hides them in the margins between royal decrees and grain tallies, because falling in love when you wear a crown is, let's just say, complicated. You think you're up for a stroll through her palace? Be warned. Between the sun that cooks sandstone floors by noon and the court intrigue that simmers even hotter by night, you might not make it to breakfast. Seriously, bring sandals, sarcasm, and maybe a spare camel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. I love seeing where in the world this sleepy caravan stops each night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't enter her chamber. You drift into it. The way perfume sneaks under a door or moonlight edges into a hallway, the walls are painted in ochres and lapis. There's a dish of pomegranates on a brass tray, half-eaten, their ruby seeds glistening like blood drops in a quiet battlefield. She's not what you expect. You were picturing Cleopatra, weren't you? The one with the eyeliner sharp enough to file papyrus. But no, this queen is younger, softer. A scholar's daughter who became a pharaoh's wife because politics always trump poetry. She doesn't rule with iron. She rules by knowing where to be silent and by hiding her heart in 10-syllable lines, carved with more care than any royal edict. You hear the scratch of reed against parchment. She's writing again. Her script curls like smoke, too delicate for law, too honest for court. Tonight's poem is shorter, just a few lines. You catch a glimpse. I loved you in silence and in margins where even gods don't dare to read. She smiles barely. Not for you, for him, whoever he was. You don't know his name yet, but you will. The walls whisper it, even when no one dares out in the corridor. Sandals scuff stone. Someone is coming. She rolls the papyrus tight and slips it beneath a basket of ceremonial fig leaves. Her hand trembles for just a second. You'd miss it if you blinked. Then her face changes, regal mask back in place. The kind of mask that says, I don't dream, I decree. But you know the truth now. And once you know, you can't unknow it. This, Queen loved, secretly, illegally. In iambic meter, a servant bows low and announces the high priest's arrival. Another negotiation, another ritual, another hour of pretending her heartbeat doesn't skip when certain footsteps echo through the garden stones. As the night thickens, you slip behind her through a silk curtain, cool against your cheek. She walks with the elegance of someone who's memorized every gaze upon her. Yet beneath her calm, the tension of a girl who has too many metaphors and nowhere to put them. The air smells like blue lotus and old secrets. You pass a sandstone, freeze where a goddess watches with unblinking eyes. You wonder idly if the goddess approves of poetry in margins, or if even deities get tangled in palace drama. From a high window, you see the Nile gleaming under moonlight, curved like a sleeping serpent. Somewhere out there, the man she writes to may be waiting, or already gone. But that's not your concern. Not yet. For now you are simply here, wrapped in linen, walking behind a queen who hides fire inside her ink, and the night is just beginning. You find yourself in a quieter wing of the palace now, where the scent shifts. Less incense, more crushed petals and papyrus glue. The queen's footsteps slow. She's alone here, or at least she believes she is. That's when you see it. Shallow stone bowl placed on a sun-warmed sill, half filled with what looks like syrup but smells unmistakably like roses. She dips her fingers in, swirls it with purpose. Not for perfume, for ink. Turns out, the court's most closely guarded. Secret isn't the war on the Nubian border, or the barley shortage in the delta. It's the queen's ink recipe. Crushed rose petals, blackened saffron, dried date skins, and something you can only guess came from a forbidden corner of the herb room. It glistens thickly as she mixes it with powdered resin. You wouldn't believe how many treaties have been signed in this palace using bland charcoal ink. But love? Love gets the good stuff. Love gets crushed roses. She lifts the small brush, not a scribe's reed, but something finer. It's made from the baby feathers of a heron, soft and absorbent, the kind of thing you'd use if you were trying to capture not just words, but breath. Outside the window, the heat rises in waves off the pale sandstone. You hear the distant hum of bees, their tiny bodies looping around flowering pomegranate bushes, but the queen is lost in her work. His voice was softer than river mist, his shadow longer than my fear. She pauses, touches the ink to her lower lip as if tasting the line. It stains her mouth like a forbidden kiss. Then she smiles. You feel that smile in your chest, like heat returning after sunset. Somewhere beyond this chamber, courtiers argue over military formations, over new taxes on fish oil. But here is where history hides behind a veil of poetry. A servant knocks. She doesn't answer. Instead, she presses the side of her thumb against the still damp words and smudges them slightly, just enough that if someone reads them later, they won't be sure if they were meant to be romantic or devotional. Clever girl. When the servant finally enters, head bowed, she's already set the page aside, fingers folded politely. No one sees the extra slip of papyrus beneath her cushion. No one asks. The servant announces that the pharaoh has requested her presence in the Hall of Scrolls. She nods, rises and rewraps her shawl, rose ink still clinging faintly to her palm. A queen must always be composed, even when her hands betray her. As she walks away, you catch sight of a small clay jar tucked near the base of a pillar. Not labeled, not official. You lift the lid. It smells of the same crushed roses and something bittersweet. The label carved in faint hieroglyphs. For the margins only. That's when you understand. These aren't just love poems. They're hidden histories, little pieces of herself she can't say out loud. No wonder no one knows her name. No wonder her legend sleeps beneath 1,000 more glamorous ones, because queens who wield swords make statues. But queens who write poems in the margins, they make ghosts. The hallway brightens as you follow her shadow down the corridor. A breeze filters through the latticework, carrying the scent of her ink, still fresh. You don't know it yet, but centuries later, someone will find those faint red lines tucked between inventory scrolls and tax records, and they'll wonder, not about battles, but about the woman who dared to feel something dangerous and write it down. The Hall of Papyrus Scrolls is cooler than the rest of the palace, shaded by woven reed mats and high-arched ceilings designed to trap the breeze. You slip in after her, ducking beneath hanging lanterns that smell faintly of oil and cedar. Here, the walls aren't decorated with grand paintings or gold-leaf gods, just rows and rows of cubbyholes, each holding brittle scrolls older than most dynasties. She moves differently in here. Not like a queen, more like a student who used to sneak into libraries after curfew. Her fingers trace the edges of titles. Her lips move as she silently mouths the first line of each scroll. You realize something startling. She's read all of these, not skimmed, read. You find it oddly comforting, as if knowing the queen shares your love of good storytelling makes her feel more real, more dangerous. She reaches for one. Not one of the important ones about border disputes or trade routes with Byblos. This one's thinner, bound with a faded blue ribbon, probably copied by a junior scribe with weak eyesight and a love for metaphors. As she opens it, you peek over her shoulder. It's a love poem, not hers, not yet, but old, older than the palace itself, written by a woman, judging by the phrasing, though no one dared to credit her name. He passed me in the garden, and the air thickened. Even the gods paused. The queen smiles, one of those private smiles that belong only to you, the page, and memory. She leans in closer to the text, and then, here's the wild part, she starts to edit it. No chisel, no royal decree, just a tiny ink mark at the corner, a soft correction here, a metaphor improved there. In the margins, of course, always the margins. You imagine future scholars arguing over the alterations centuries from now, debating if they were made by a student or a jealous rival. They'll never guess it was the Queen herself, polishing a forgotten poem while the world believed she was attending military briefings. She never fought a war, they'll say. She just read. As if reading weren't rebellion. From a distance, you hear the slow beat of a tambourine, a signal. The festival of Opet is about to begin and she's late, very late. She rolls the scroll carefully, then tucks something inside before tying it shut. A sliver of her own poetry. You can see the corner sticking out. He walks without sound, but every silence tastes of him. She slides it into a cubbyhole marked Harvest Records, 8th year of Amos. No one will think to look there. But you'll remember. A breeze brushes past your cheek, cool and sudden. She glances over her shoulder like she felt it too. Then she exhales and walks toward the light spilling in from the hall, where gold banners flutter and priests chant hymns to Amun. But she's not thinking about gods, she's thinking about him, and the line she didn't finish writing. Because that's the thing with poetry. It's never truly finished. It just waits for someone someday to find the right margin. As you trail her through the grand entrance, you wonder, not for the last time, how many queens were poets, and how many poets had to pretend they weren't queens, and whether she ever meant for you to follow her this far. His voice was softer than river mist, his shadow longer than my fear. She pauses, touches the ink to her lower lip, as if tasting the line. It stains her mouth like a forbidden kiss. Then she smiles. You feel that smile in your chest, like heat returning after sunset. Somewhere, beyond this chamber, courtiers argue. Over military formations, over new taxes on fish oil. But here is where history hides behind a veil of poetry. A servant knocks. She doesn't answer. Instead, she presses the side of her thumb against the still damp words and smudges them, slightly, just enough that if someone reads them later, they won't be sure if they were meant to be romantic and or devotional. Clever girl. When the servant finally enters, head bowed, she's already set the page aside, fingers folded politely. No one sees the extra slip of papyrus beneath her cushion. No one asks. The servant announces that the pharaoh has requested her presence in the Hall of Scrolls. She nods, rises and rewraps her shawl, rose ink still clinging faintly to her palm. A queen must always be composed, even when her hands betray her. As she walks away, you catch sight of a small clay jar tucked near the base of a pillar. Not labeled, not official. You lift the lid. It smells of the same crushed roses and something bittersweet. The label carved in faint hieroglyphs. For the margins only. That's when you understand. These aren't just love poems. They're hidden histories, little pieces of herself she can't say out loud. No wonder no one knows her name. No wonder her legend sleeps beneath 1,000 more glamorous ones, because queens who wield swords make statues. But queens who write poems in the margins? They make ghosts. The hallway brightens as you follow her shadow down the corridor. A breeze filters through the latticework, carrying the scent of her ink, still fresh. You don't know it yet, but centuries later, someone will find those faint red lines tucked between inventory scrolls and tax records, and they'll wonder, not about battles, but about the woman who dared to feel something dangerous, and write it down. The scent hits you first, lotus, sandalwood and roasted dates. Then the noise. A wall of drums and flutes pours out from the palace courtyard like a tidal wave of celebration. The festival of Opet has begun. You blink at the sudden brightness. Gold-threaded banners ripple in the heat, and sacred boats bob gently in a ceremonial canal as priests, dancers and citizens swirl in dizzying color. She steps out into the chaos, her expression a perfect mask, regal, composed. But you know better now. You've seen the margins. You've watched her press love into pages no one else will read. That same hand now lifts to acknowledge the crowds. The people cheer, not for her poems, but for the image, divine wife, goddess incarnate, vessel of Ma'at. You wonder if they'd still cheer if they knew she whispered sonnets in the dark, and once cried over a line she couldn't quite finish. You follow her down the steps toward the grand avenue of sphinxes where the sacred procession waits. Musicians strike up a rhythm that feels like the heartbeat of 1,000 years. The air buzzes with incense and the electric thrill of spectacle. And then, among the dozens of attendants, you spot him, the architect. He's not dressed as a noble, but you recognize him. The almond-shaped eyes, the quiet way he scans the crowd like he's sketching it all in his mind. He carries a roll of blueprints under his arm, feigning official duties. But his eyes keep drifting to her. Just for a second, always just for a second too long, and she doesn't look, not directly, but her fingers twitch slightly against her robe, and you see it, a line of faint red ink still staining her thumbnail. It's enough. You realize something. Their entire relationship exists in stolen seconds and invisible gestures. In looks, no. One dares name in lines of verse no one's allowed to read. If the gods knew, they'd call it blasphemy. If the court knew, they'd call it treason. If history knew, it might call it nothing at all. Love stories without statues, she once wrote, are the ones you have to whisper to remember. A dancer spins past in a blur of gold, and the queen uses the moment to murmur to her closest. Maidservant, no one hears it but you. The west pillar, second lotus from the bottom, check tonight. The maid nods so subtly it's almost a blink. A message passed, a plan in motion. You're not sure what it means yet, but you will. As the boats begin their slow ceremonial glide down the canal, the queen climbs aboard. Her posture is perfect. The people cheer louder now, throwing petals and chanting her name. Somewhere nearby, a priest anoints the prow with sacred oil. A crocodile surfaces in the water for a moment, then disappears unnoticed by most. The architect doesn't board. He disappears into the crowd, like a shadow folding in on itself. But the queen's gaze lingers a beat too long in his direction. The boat begins to move. You feel the weight of centuries in that moment. How fragile history really is. Not in the battles, not in the tombs, but in the spaces between, the margins. Always the margins. As you drift behind her, the sounds of the festival melt into background hum. Your attention shifts back to her hands. Still. Clenched now, because she's already writing the next verse. Not with ink this time, but with risk. And every line will cost her something. You find her again hours later, cloaked in twilight. The smell of sandalwood heavier now, richer, darker. The festivities are winding down, but she hasn't returned to her royal quarters. Instead, she slips through a side passage, away from the perfume of lotus garlands and the chant still echoing in the main square. The room she enters is dim, lit only by the flicker of a single oil lamp. This isn't a writing chamber. No scrolls, no scribes, no advisors. Just silk cushions, a shallow basin of water still rippling from her footsteps, and a small chest carved with falcons and ivy. You follow quietly. She doesn't speak, but her presence is a murmur in your bones now. You watch as she kneels beside the chest and lifts the lid. Inside, jars. Small clay vessels sealed with wax. She opens one carefully and dips her finger. Inside, sandalwood oil, thick and golden. She massages it into her skin, shoulders, arms, wrists. The scent fills the air, ancient and intimate. It's not for ceremony, not for politics. This is the ritual of a woman preparing herself to feel something she's been told she shouldn't. The scent lingers on your tongue, like a memory you didn't make. And then, folded beneath the cloth lining of the chest, you see it. A torn scrap of linen, ink-stained, a verse. I touched your hand beneath the fig tree, and for a moment the world obeyed. It's not written in the elegant style she uses for court documents. This is quick, urgent, smudged, like it had to be hidden before it dried. She reads it again and again, eyes half-lidded, like the memory behind the words is more real than the marble walls around her. That fig tree, that moment. You suddenly ache to see it. Was it a garden, a courtyard? Did the guards look away? Was the breeze warm that day? And more importantly, does he remember it too? Outside, the crickets begin their nighttime chorus, a low rhythmic hum like a lullaby written by the earth itself. She doesn't move, just sits there, palms open, linen resting like a prayer between her fingers. You notice now, her reflection in the bronze mirror nearby isn't that of a queen. It's of someone younger, lonelier, someone who memorized his voice not because she had to, but because she wasn't sure she'd ever hear it again. He spoke like the Nile at dusk, she'd once written, slow, unstoppable, carving, through everything I believed. A soft knock, a different servant this time, male, nervous. "My queen," he whispers, "the architect sent word. West pillar. The lotus has bloomed." She doesn't reply, just presses the linen verse too. Her chest stands and closes the chest slowly, like sealing away a heartbeat. You follow her through another narrow hallway, this one quiet as breath. The kind of place that's been forgotten by most, but not by her. She knows these walls better than her own reflection. She pauses at a fresco, faded, chipped. A mural of Hathor, goddess of love, playing the sistrum beneath a fig tree. You blink. That same fig tree, maybe not, but she smiles at it, like she's in on the joke. And before she continues, she leaves something behind. A single drop of sandalwood oil pressed onto the foot of the painted tree. You'd miss it if you didn't know to look, but you do, because now you know her code. You speak in oils. You read in silences, and you never ever underestimate what a queen will risk, just to write one true thing down. The temple grounds at night are a different world entirely. Gone is the heat, the clamor, the performative gold. What remains is stone, cool, ancient, humming with secrets, and the soft scrape of your feet on sand-polished floor. The moon is high now, casting silver over the pillars, washing the lotus-carved capitals in light so pale they look like bone. She moves ahead of you, hooded now, not in ceremonial silk, but in something plainer. Still elegant, still unmistakably. Royal but quieter, the kind of robe you wear when you don't want your footsteps to echo. You approach the west pillar, second lotus from the bottom. From a distance it's unremarkable. Another piece of carved stone in a temple, built before her grandfather's grandfather was born. But she kneels, fingers tracing the edge of one petal, and there it is, etched in, beneath the stylized lines of the blossom, almost invisible in the dim light. You were here. I felt it. Even the gods paused. Her breath catches. Yours does too. It's not her handwriting. It's his. You recognize the difference instantly. His lines are straighter, less adorned. Practical, like blueprints, but the words pure poetry. He's been here tonight, and he left her a message. She reaches into her sleeve and pulls out something small, a sliver of papyrus, barely wider than a reed stem. She tucks it just behind the carving, into a gap so narrow it might vanish by morning dew. You lean in, catching the first line before. She hides it away. I dreamed of you in stone and woke with dust in my mouth. You wonder how many of these messages they've passed, how many poems are scattered across the palace, buried beneath layers of marble, paint, and silence. The gods must know by now, and yet they stay quiet. A soft rustle behind you. Her maidservant returns, this time with a thin bundle, cloth-wrapped and pressed flat. Inside, a plan. Sketches for a new garden courtyard, ostensibly commissioned. For the Queen's personal use. In reality, a map. You see it immediately. The fig tree in the center, the hidden alcove, the covered walkway, all drawn with maddening precision, and yet to anyone else, it's just landscaping. She runs a finger down the path and smiles. He's bold, she murmurs. It's the first time she's spoken aloud tonight. Her voice sounds not regal, not distant, just tired, human, and proud. You follow her out of the temple, past statues of falcons and lions, their stone eyes watching but not judging. Somewhere above, a shooting star splits the sky in two, a good omen if you believe in such things. She doesn't look up. Her eyes are on the garden plans, and her thoughts, already writing the next verse. Some queens build monuments. You hear her whisper, I build a hiding place for a sentence. That's when it hits you. None of this is an accident. The gardens, the hidden lines, the temple pillars turned into stanzas. She isn't just passing notes. She's building a book. Say, love story, scattered in pieces across stone, scent, and shadow. and only he and now you know how to read it. The sun rises behind the palace like it's been watching all night. The light creeps into the courtyards, brushing past sleeping guards, flickering off copper urns, and slipping under carved doors like a polite intruder. You follow her through the servants' corridor, past linen bundles and drying herbs, into a quieter part of the complex, where papyrus grows wild in shallow water gardens and frogs sing as if the gods gave them something urgent to say. She moves, slower today, her shoulders heavier. Maybe it's the weight of too many hidden verses, or maybe she knows what's coming. A courier kneels before her as she steps into the atrium. He's young, dusty, eyes downcast. "A message," he says, offering the sealed tablet. "From the first gnome." She doesn't open it immediately. She thanks him with the softness of someone who remembers what it's like to wait for news, then retreats to a bench shaded by date palms. The wax seal is still warm from the sun, pressed with a falcon crest. It's official. She cracks it. Her eyes scan the lines. They do not widen. They do not flinch. But you know. You know because... She closes the tablet too carefully as if afraid it might scream if dropped. The North has rebelled, not in full, not yet, but a series of uprisings. Temples desecrated, food shipments seized. A symbol daubed in red on a magistrate's wall. A line of verse. "The silence between us was the first betrayal." You've seen that line before. She wrote it. 2 weeks ago. In the margin of a scroll about grain distribution. It was never supposed to be seen. Someone found it. Someone copied it. Now it's a slogan. A war cry. A weapon. You can almost hear the council's outrage already. Her verses are stirring unrest. Words don't belong to queens. This is what happens when women are given ink. But she doesn't rage. She doesn't panic. She closes her eyes and remembers the first time she wrote a poem. Not as a queen, not even as a wife, but as a girl, barefoot in a half-abandoned courtyard, scratching a line in the dust with a reed, heart pounding like she'd committed a crime. She opens her eyes and whispers, more to herself than anyone else. "I only ever meant to be honest." You believe her, but the world doesn't reward honesty. The high priest is already asking for an audience. She knows what that means. They'll want her to publicly denounce the poem, claim it was forged, or worse, pretend it was about the gods, not about him. But how do you unsay something that was truer than silence? She rises, smooths her robe, and does something unexpected. She picks a single flower from the papyrus patch, small, white, forgettable, and tucks it into the folds of the courier's satchel before he leaves. A reply, perhaps, or a signature. A gesture that will mean nothing to most, but everything to one. You trail her through the great hall where statues of ancestors line the walls. They all look forward, unblinking, unmoved. You wonder what they'd think, these great kings and queens of old, if they knew one of their own was being unmade by her own poetry. Then again, maybe one of them did the same. Maybe one line, one slip, one secret carved too beautifully was what unraveled everything. "Words are sharper than spears," she wrote once, "because they aim for memory," and hers, already spreading like wildfire, burning borders, lighting minds, changing everything. The temple of Amun is hushed today. Not in reverence, no, this silence is different. It's the kind that crackles, the kind that waits. You feel it before you even step across the threshold, a kind of sacred tension. Like every stone in the sanctuary, has clenched its jaw. She enters through the eastern gate. Alone, unannounced, no musicians trailing behind. Even the priests, robed in white, perfumed with frankincense, step aside when she passes. Not out of respect, out of uncertainty. They've read the message too, or heard whispers, or felt the chill it cast. One of them speaks, the eldest, voice rough as sand against bronze. "My queen." The gods are concerned. It's a statement, not a question, and she knows better than to challenge it directly, so she bows her head just enough to be courteous, just enough to make them wonder if it's agreement or irony. He gestures toward the altar, not the grand one where oxen are sacrificed and prayers for flood waters are sung, a smaller one, simpler, for private supplication, though everyone knows that's just a polite way to say spiritual politics, There on the altar cloth is a scroll, unfurled. Even the Nile turns away when the heart betrays the mouth. It's hers, copied without permission. Read without context. Placed here like evidence in a trial where the sentence has already been chosen. The priest says, "We fear such words, confuse the people." They begin to question order, to mistake desire for divine will. She does not respond immediately. Instead, she steps closer to the altar, fingers grazing the papyrus as if it were fragile skin. Then softly, "I wrote this in solitude, not for the people, not for their revolt, not for their confusion, just for myself." The younger priests murmur. The old one leans forward. "But once written, Your Majesty, nothing belongs only to the self. You know he's right, and so does she. Still," she lifts the scroll, rolls it gently, and places it into a small ivory case. Not destroyed, not erased, preserved. "If the gods disapprove," she says at last, "they are welcome to silence me themselves." A pause, no lightning, no thunder, only the drip of a water basin somewhere in the distance. She turns to leave, but just before crossing the threshold, she pauses by a mural, a half-faded depiction of Hathor offering a sistrum to a kneeling girl. You've seen that look in her eyes before. Not fear, not defiance, intention. "They forget," she whispers to no one in particular, "that Hathor was not just love and beauty. She was vengeance too." Outside, the heat builds. The stone underfoot simmers. But she walks calmly, stepping over the temple threshold like she's shedding an old skin, because she knows now this isn't just about love anymore. This is about power, and who gets to speak, and who gets remembered. You trail her down the avenue of sphinxes, where even the statues seem to lean slightly closer, listening, because something has changed. She's no longer just writing for him. She's writing for survival, for legacy, for a future where queens don't need permission to feel, to write, or to burn. You hear the news before she does. A messenger gallops through the southern gate at dawn, his horse foaming, breath rattling like a broken drum. Soldiers converge. Whispers ricochet across tiled courtyards. By the time she steps onto her balcony, robe still damp from morning mist, the entire inner court already knows, the rival queen has arrived from Nubia. Younger, hungrier, draped in gold and diplomacy. Her caravan stretches for miles, ivory, incense, leopard skins, polished obsidian. But it's not the gifts that shake the palace. It's the rumor. She asked to see the queen's private chambers, specifically the writing room you follow as she prepares. The queen doesn't panic, doesn't pace. She simply pulls open a low chest and begins removing papers. Not the official ones, not treaties or tax reports, the others, the ones with metaphors, the ones with ache. You see her hesitate over one in particular, faded ink, a line barely visible anymore. He waited with the stillness of someone who's already said, "Goodbye." She doesn't destroy it. She folds it, tucks it under her belt, keeps it close. Minutes later, the rival queen enters. She's all confidence and clever smiles. You can smell her perfume before she speaks, a syrupy mix of myrrh and pomegranate. She walks like she owns the room and pauses like she's reading the very air. Their conversation begins polite, surface level, diplomatic. Two queens exchanging veiled compliments and blunted threats. But then, something shifts. The visitor gestures toward a papyrus roll near the writing table. "Your calligraphy," she says, "is uncommonly elegant for someone who rules." There's a pause. "Thank you," your queen replies. "I find ruling less difficult than pretending I don't feel." The rival queen raises a brow. "And do you write often? Of feeling?" Another pause. "No," she lies. "I write when silence becomes unbearable. A silence follows that sentence too, but not unbearable, just heavy, the kind that leaves fingerprints." Then casually, too casually, the Nubian queen picks up a sheet, one of the drafts, not incriminating but intimate. "If he is a dream, then let me never wake." Their eyes meet, and for a second you see it. Recognition. The rival knows, or suspects, or once wrote something similar herself, But instead of exposing her, she smiles thinly, knowingly, and sets the sheet down. "Poetry," she says, "is dangerous currency," to which the Queen answers, almost a whisper, "Only if it's true." After the visitor leaves, the Queen doesn't speak. She returns to her writing table but doesn't sit. Just stands there, palms on wood, jaw tight. You feel it in the room. The shift. She knows the rival saw too much. That whispers will travel. That somewhere, someone will begin drawing lines between the poems and the politics. And yet, she doesn't. Stop. Instead, she picks up a fresh sheet and begins to write. Not love this time, not longing. Something sharper. They call it treason when a woman names her own fire. She seals it with wax. No addressee, no signature. Just an emblem carved into the wax, a lotus blossom cracked down the center. You don't know where it will be sent, or to whom. Only this. She's not hiding anymore. Not entirely. The margins have widened, and she's no longer afraid of the edge. Midnight again. You're walking with her now through the upper gardens, silent save for the chirp of frogs near the pond and the faint rustling of papyrus in the wind. The stars overhead are blinding, as if the gods forgot to dim them. A soft breeze lifts the hem of her robe, and for once she doesn't smooth it back down. She just walks, letting the night touch her. She stops by a column. Old, weathered, a leftover from an earlier dynasty. You wouldn't notice it if you didn't know the signs, but you've learned, etched faintly at eye level, beneath curling vines of stone. The moon watches everything, but says nothing. It's her line. You've seen it before. Scribbled, in a corner of a discarded papyrus, half smudged by sandalwood oil. Now it lives in stone. You ask yourself, who carved it? Was it her? Was it him? Or someone else entirely, someone reading her secret verses and deciding quietly that they deserved to outlive parchment? She exhales slowly. Her hand rests lightly on the carved line, and her fingers trace it like a memory. Then she whispers, "Not to you, not even to herself, but to the night. I didn't write to be remembered, I wrote because I couldn't speak." You follow her to the edge of the garden, where the terrace opens to a view of the Nile. It's black now, like ink in a spilled inkwell threading the city in silence. Somewhere in the distance a priest strikes a gong, marking the third watch of the night. She sits. For a long time she says nothing, but her hands aren't idle. She pulls out a scrap of linen, already stained with dried ink. Not new, not planned. Just something that's lived in her sleeve for days, and begins writing. No desk, no lamp, just her lap and moonlight. They say queens should not weep, but no one tells the moon not to drown in the tide. You want to believe this poem is for him. But it isn't, not anymore. It's for her, a kind of reclamation, of silence, of sorrow, of the ache that rules don't reach because this war she's fighting, it's no longer secret. Someone altered a palace mural last week, swapped the name of a god for one of her lines. An entire town in the Delta quoted her verse during a grain protest. The priests are furious, the council is terrified, and the people, they're listening. To poetry. She turns to you. Well, not to you exactly, but to the air, the dark, the silence that you now inhabit beside her, and says, as if answering a question only the stars asked, "What they call rebellion began as longing." You stay with her until the wind shifts, until she tucks the linen, scrap back into her sleeve until she stands. She doesn't look at the moon again, doesn't need to, it's already watching, and still saying nothing. The next morning breaks quiet, too quiet. No musicians tuning their harps in the courtyard, no scent of spiced bread wafting from the kitchens. Even the doves nesting in the stone cornices seem to hold their breath. Something has changed, you find. Her in the map chamber, usually reserved for generals and advisors. But today she's alone, surrounded by scrolls marked with military routes and trade flows, towers and tributaries. There's a chalk stick in her hand, and a long strip of parchment stretched across the central table. She's drawing a line, not a boundary, not a border. A path, from the palace gardens to the southern riverbank. Then west, into a cluster of Abandoned temple ruins now used mostly by shepherds, and those too forgotten to be feared. It has to be quiet, she murmurs, but not invisible. You realize it's not a map for an army. It's an escape route, not for herself, for him. She doesn't say his name, she never does, but you feel the shape of it in her silence, and in the way her hand hesitates over each bend in the path, considering which caves flood during the monsoon season, which watchtower guards are more loyal to bribes than duty. A scroll rests beside her elbow, sealed in red wax, unbroken. She hasn't read it yet. She doesn't need to, you recognize the seal, it's his. Instead, she continues tracing, one step ahead of the inevitable. Because rumors are tightening like a noose, the council has met without her. The rival queen has lingered longer than protocol requires, and this morning a single line of her poetry appeared carved into the outer wall of the Falcon Gate. Let me love him quietly enough to survive. There are no signatures, no witnesses, just stone, and the weight of too many eyes watching too closely. She finishes the map, folds it once, then again, wraps it in linen, presses it to her lips, just once, and seals it with sandalwood wax. The courier who receives it won't know what he carries, not entirely. Just a package to be delivered to a stonemason in the southern district, but you know. You always know. You walk with her as she returns to the archive wing, not the royal archive, hers. The hidden one. A low alcove behind the scribe's hall, disguised as a storeroom for broken styluses and spoiled papyrus. Inside are stacks, poems, letters never sent, lines struck out but never forgotten. Marginalia written in moments she could not speak out, loud. She picks up a single scroll bound in worn ribbon. You catch a glimpse of the first line. I was a woman before I was a throne. She doesn't reread it. She just places it atop the others, ties the bundle tighter, and hides it under a panel in the floor. Not because she thinks she'll be gone, but because she's not sure she'll be allowed to stay. Let history find me, she says softly, even if the present forgets. And for a moment, even the air around you feels reverent, as if the gods are listening now, and not entirely sure what to do. It starts with a sound, not a trumpet, not the clang of metal or the bark of soldiers, a bell, small, subtle. Hung in the eastern tower, where it hasn't been rung in nearly a decade. It's reserved for one thing only, an emergency meeting of the High Council, without royal summons. She freezes where she stands, mid-step halfway through the threshold of the Sun courtyard. For a heartbeat, the entire palace seems to hold itself upright, like a vase set on a ledge. Then the sound ripples outward, and everything begins to tilt. You follow as she turns, not toward the meeting hall, but away. She knows what this is. Not a meeting, an intervention. You catch up with her just as she enters her writing chamber, shuts the door and draws the bolt. She doesn't waste time. Doesn't cry, doesn't pace. She writes, faster than you've ever seen her. Hands flying over linen, fingers stained with ink and sandalwood. Her lips move silently, whispering each line aloud as if casting a spell, as if by speaking the truth she can protect it from being rewritten. They'll name me traitor. Let them. I named myself long before they dared to. You glance over her shoulder. This isn't a poem. It's a letter. Not to him, to history. She writes not with desperation but clarity, the kind of sharpness that only comes when a person accepts they may lose the present and decides to bargain with the future instead. Then a knock, not a servant's knock, a priest's knock, measured, final. My queen, the voice calls. You are requested. Not invited, requested. She doesn't answer. Instead, she blows on the ink, folds the letter 3 times, seals it with the same wax she used for her poems. Then she moves to the eastern wall, where the mural of Hathor has faded nearly to dust. You've passed it a dozen times. But now, you see the edge of a hidden crevice behind the painted veil. She slides the letter in, behind the goddess's hand. If they destroy me, she murmurs, they'll have to paint over her first. You feel it now, something tightening in your throat, because you understand this isn't just the end of her story. It might be the end of her voice. The door rattles. They're unlocking it from the outside now. The bolt shakes, the hinges groan. She stands in the center of the room, spine straight, palms open, ready not to plead but to bear witness. The door bursts open. 2 council guards step in. The high priest follows, eyes unreadable. "Your Majesty," he says, "we must speak on matters of sedition." She nods once, but before they lead her away, she turns back to the writing table, picks up a reed pen, dips it one last time and writes on the edge of the parchment still lying there, "If silence is survival, then let my words haunt the walls. They don't notice. But you do." As they escort her from the chamber, you remain alone with her ink. And the echo of sandals on stone fading into the hall, and you wonder, not for the first time, what history owes to the ones who wrote quietly and were punished loudly. The door remains ajar long after they've gone. You slip back into the room, the silence thick like river silt. Her reed pen still rests where she left it, tip blotched with drying ink. The oil lamp burns low now, throwing soft gold shadows against the mural of Hathor, whose gaze suddenly feels less decorative, more complicit. You kneel where she stood, where she wrote. The letter hidden behind the goddess's painted veil feels warmer than stone should. You don't touch it, just rest your hand close. Her words are there, waiting. But you know that outside, beyond this small sanctuary, a storm has begun. You hear the accusations first, muffled through the sandstone, whispers sharpened into speeches. Her poetry recited not with reverence, but with suspicion. "Let no man speak for me unless he bleeds what I've bled." They quote her now, as if her metaphors were daggers, as if ink can infect an empire, and in the hall of judgment she stands alone, no attendants. No crown. They've stripped her down to linen robes, ceremonial modesty, they say. But really it's about control, about unmaking the queen, turning her back into a woman the council can speak over. But you know something they don't. She was always more dangerous as a woman. The high priest speaks first, lists her infractions like inventory, unauthorized writings, private correspondence with foreigners, romantic sympathies that threaten divine order. She doesn't interrupt, until he recites the final verse aloud. "If they erase my name, may they find it written in their own." The chamber stills and she smiles gently, as though he's just proven her point. "I never asked to be remembered," she says, "but you've remembered me anyway." You imagine the council squirming, bound by their own hypocrisy, tangled in the very verses they sought to condemn, like trying to burn a scroll with a flame that only spreads the ink. Then the sentence is passed. Not death. Not exile, erasure. Her name stripped from the walls, her likeness removed from murals, her authorship reassigned to scribes and priests, 100 verses, now declared anonymous, as if unnaming her could unmake her. But you know better. Because she planned for this. In secret, in margins, in gardens and stone cracks. Her legacy isn't on the palace scrolls, it's everywhere else. That west pillar still holds his words. That papyrus scroll hidden in the tax record still carries her sorrow, and the mural behind you still shelters her truth, pressed between clay and goddess. You rise, walking slowly to the doorway, just as night begins to creep through the palace like a second skin. Somewhere she is being led back to her quarters, not as a queen, as a shadow. But, you know, shadows stretch farther than light, and when the scribes come tomorrow to rewrite her out of history, they will miss things. They always do. A verse in a servant's lullaby. A symbol scratched on the bottom of a pot. A name whispered in the dark when no one dares speak loudly. You pause just before leaving the room. On the table, in her handwriting, one last unfinished line. You tried to silence me. And nothing. More, you don't need the rest, because you already know how the sentence ends. The next day arrives without ceremony. No court gatherings, no morning trumpet. The air in the palace is strange, cleaner, colder, like someone has swept too hard, trying to erase more than just dust. You walk through the halls and notice it. Scrolls missing, murals half-washed, statues with names chiseled smooth. And her, she's still here, alive, present, moving through the corridors like a ghost that refuses to fade. But now, no one bows. No one speaks her name. Her title is gone. Her voice not forbidden, just unacknowledged. You watch her from the balcony. She tends to a lotus plant in the upper gardens, hands careful, movements slow. Not as a ruler, but as something older than power. A keeper, a witness. The gardener offers a nervous bow. She smiles and asks after his daughter. The man blinks, surprised. To be spoken to, but answers. He still calls her my queen, though he whispers it like a secret. That night she returns to the writing chamber. No guards stop her now. Why would they? She's not dangerous anymore, they think. She's corrected, but they forget that she built this silence, that she knows its corners better than any of them. She lights a single lamp and opens a jar buried beneath the floor. Panels. Inside papyrus scraps, verses, half-lines, dreams. Some are smudged, some water-damaged, all hers. You watch as she selects one, smooths it flat. My name is Wind. The more you try to hold it, the louder I become. She reads it once, then folds it into a tiny triangle, tucks it into a slit beneath the window. Frame, a servant will find it later. Or a child, or no one. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's out there, again. Because erasure is only effective when it's complete. Hanshi has made herself uncontainable. In the weeks that follow, whispers begin. In the city's southern alleys, a merchant quotes her lines during a price dispute. On the Nile, fishermen hum stanzas of her oldest verse, not knowing where they heard it. A little girl is caught scribbling a line in red pigment on her courtyard wall. To be quiet is not the same as being silenced. The scribes try to trace it. The council grows nervous. The high priest frowns beneath his ceremonial veil, but the verses have no signature, no seal, just rhythm, just truth, and truth has always traveled faster than order. You return to the garden. She's seated beneath the fig tree now, ink-stained fingers resting on her lap. The architect is gone, vanished into the borderlands. You'll never know whether he escaped or was caught, but you see it now, the tree he once stood under, the same place where her poems began, and on the inner trunk, scratched low and subtle, for the one who read me before I read myself. She closes her eyes and you feel it, deep, unspoken, resolute. Even without a name, even without a crown, she is still writing, still dangerous, still here. The palace is quieter than ever now, but not empty. Servants speak in low voices. Courtiers pass like shadows. The walls no longer bear her image, but you can feel her presence in every corner, like perfume on parchment, like breath in old cloth. She walks the halls freely, not because she's forgiven, because they no longer know what to do with her. They erased her name, but not her existence. And now they wait, hoping the silence will finish what the council began. But silence, in her hands, is never still. You find her one last time in the lower chamber, the first one where this story began. The small room near the herb garden, the one that always smelled of crushed rose and parchment. The lamp is low, the windows cracked. A breeze carries the scent of papyrus and dust. She is writing again. But this time she does something new. She signs it, not with her royal title, not with her family name, not with the emblem of a house long stripped from the scrolls, just a single word. I. You realize, all at once, that this is her final verse. Not because she's giving up, but because she's finished. Because she said what she needed to say. Because every echo has become its own voice now. If history has margins, let mine be wide. Let them bloom. Let them sing. She folds the page slowly, wraps it in linen, seals it, not with wax, but with a thread of her own hair, and places it not behind a statue or within a pillar, but beneath her own sleeping mat, because she's not hiding this one. She's leaving it behind, visible, reachable, like a breadcrumb trail in a forest that no longer frightens her. You follow her through the gardens one last time. The night air is soft, cool, smelling of earth and ink and rain that hasn't yet come. She pauses beneath the fig tree, closes her eyes and exhales, not with sorrow. Not with regret, with rest, because her work is done. The world might forget her name, might credit her poems to gods or ghosts or anonymous, might bury her words in the back of scrolls or in footnotes to male scribes with cleaner hands. But you won't forget. You who walked the corridors, who read the lines, who watched her bleed through margins and gardens and stone, and as her final verse fades into the night air, you feel yourself growing still, the story slowing, the light dimming. Her voice, once sharp with longing and rebellion, softens now, becomes a lullaby. A whisper tucked under your pillow, a truth too gentle to be erased. I was never meant to last, but I lasted anyway. In ink, in breath, in you. So let your eyes close. Let the night hold you. Let her words drift down like petals, because she feels safe now, because she has been heard, and because at last she can sleep.